What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix for Week 7 of the 2021 CFL season. I'm Ryan Coop here with your wide receiver preview for Week number 7. If you missed it, go back, check out the quarterback and running back previews for this week, and I'll have your defensive preview out later on Thursday as well. Then a depth chart update out on Friday to get you all set for Week number 7 of CFL Fantasy. Let's take a look at the receivers. Let's go team by team, matchup by matchup, and talk about the options I like, I'm cautious on, or don't like from each team. And it starts off with the matchup between the Calgary Stampeders and the Hamilton Tiger Cats on Friday night. The one option I really like for Calgary, first of all, is Josh Huff. He comes in at $65.69 is his salary, so it is finally starting to rise. Which it's taken a bit of time, but it has started to rise a little bit. You need to get the full value to help you get a 100-point week. You need 2.5 points for every $1,000 you spend. If you're spending it on Josh Huff, you need 16.4 to get you your full value out of him this week. He's averaged 12.8 through 6 games. He, had a bit more of a down week last week where you didn't get full value from him finally at 11.6, but he did get involved in the return game a little bit, which I expect him to again with Malik Henry still out. He is one of the top targets in that Calgary offense. I know last week, Bo Levi Mitchell went to Kamar Jordan and tried to go to Markeith Ambles a little bit more, so Huff fell down a little bit in that regard, but I think he's still a viable target who can make big plays when he has the ball in his hand. As the cheaper of the big three receivers for Calgary, I do like that option. I think there is a bit of room to pass against this Ticats defense. So I like Josh Huff this week. I think he missed practice 1 day or 2 days already this week, though, so we'll have to monitor when the depth charts come out later in the week, make sure he's on there. But if he is, I do like him once again this week to cover the value for you, or at least come close. I'm cautious. I'm putting a yellow light on Kamar Jordan and Markeith Ambles. Kamar Jordan had the top receiver total out of anybody last week, 33.9 points, which was a fantastic day for him. 12 catches, 150 yards, a touchdown. You can't ask for much more from Jordan than a performance like that, but it's not too often you're going to see a guy put that performance up on back-to-back-to-back weeks, and at over $10,000, you need 27 points from him in order to make sure you get the full value. He's averaging 17.8, which is just a bit over that 1.5 per $1,000 range. So on most weeks, more often than not, you're not quite getting full value out of Jordan, but I think he's a very good fantasy play. I think he is Bo Levi Mitchell's favorite target in that Calgary offense, and they have great chemistry. And it's back-to-back weeks now where he's put up over 21 points. So, maybe he is worth the money at that price point to at least get you 2 points per $1,000, which is close to the value, and then maybe you make it up on a value play. So, I could see him having another good week. Do I think it's going to be a full value week? No, I do not for him. I see him having a good but not outstanding week this week necessarily. Markeith Ambles had something ridiculous like 17 targets last week. And 15 targets the week before, something like that. He's the number one targeted receiver in that Calgary offense, but Bo Levi Mitchell and Markeith Ambles just did not connect on very many of those passes his way. Either they were dropped or they were overthrown, etc. So I'm cautious on him because if he connects on those targets and some of those end up in the end zone, he should have no problem hitting a 19-point week for you. But that seems to be the case where that's just not connecting fully. He had just 10.5 last week. He did have 22.8 the week before when Jake Mayer was in at quarterback, but his other performances this season have hovered around the 15, the 16 to all the way down to just 6 points the first couple of weeks. So I'm cautious on Ambles at the price point just because I don't think he quite hits that unless they finally get on the fully the same page and he can start completing more of those targets his way. The ones I'm staying away from for Calgary this week, Herji Mayala, still nothing going for him this season. 4.7 point average for him. His salary has dropped, 1,000 to 2,000 now and keeps dropping, but he's still not putting up nearly what you need to get value out of him. Richie Sindani barely gets involved in that Calgary offense, and Nick Hawley, who stepped in as the main return guy last week. I think he got involved in an offensive play or two, but you need 6.3 points from him. He got you 3.7 in his first game last week. I think there's maybe potential to get you to the value you need, but I think there's a lot of better value plays around the league than a guy like Nick Hawley, so I'm saying stay away. Looking at the Ticats side of things, this is where we get into some of those better value plays. The one option I really like for the Ticats, Tim White, $29.70. Salary went up a little bit, but not very much. You need 7.4 from him to get the full bang for your buck, and he's averaging 12 in 4 games this year, which is a pretty good sample size to be producing a solid point total for you. Just 9.5 last week, 21.9 the week before. Even if you're getting that 9 to 10 points each and every week from Tim White, that's a success on your fantasy week. That's a couple extra points than you need from him even. So against the Calgary defense that has given up a lot of passing yards so far this season, I know it might be David Watford at quarterback, which, take that with a grain of salt. We haven't really seen much from him as a starting QB in the CFL, so it's hard to project how that's necessarily going to go. But I think as a guy who's been on the practice roster, been a backup, and has been practicing with some of these younger receivers who are only getting in the game due to injury, to guys like Braylon Addison, I think Tim White and him could have a nice connection this week. So I like Tim White as a pick. I'm cautious on Jalen Acklin, $5,979. You need 15 points out of him for a full week. You're averaging 11.1. He comes close to that, but, in the last 3 weeks, 2.3, 12.6, 9.8. He really hasn't had a breakout game since that week 1 performance of 22.8 against the Bombers. So, Jalen Acklin's a guy I've put in my lineup 3 or 4 times now this year, and I hit the nail on the head in week 1 with that pick. But since then, it's by and large been not getting the full value. So I say cautious on him. I think he can still, if he actually starts getting fully used in that offense, more to his ability. I think he could hit you with a full value of 15 points, but he's been slightly let down in that regard the last few weeks. A couple others I'm cautious on. Value plays Poppy White, Stephen Dunbar Jr. They each have one big week under them. Last week it was Poppy White with 16.3 points. A couple weeks before that it was Dunbar Jr. with 21.5. I have them in the cautious category just because I'm not sure which one's going to have a good game. I like Tim White's sample size of 4 games and steady production in those. That's why I have him as a green light. But Poppy White and Stephen Dunbar Jr. have had 1 big game and then 2, semi-decent games. So I'm not green-lighting them necessarily for this week, but think they're not too terrible of cheap options for you. I'm staying away from Brandon Banks if he plays. I don't think he's practiced yet this week, so he might be out for a second straight week. If he's in, I don't see him putting up 32.4 points, especially if you have an inexperienced starting quarterback. I don't think Banks is putting up quite that point total or even anything close to it in his first game back. Until his salary keeps dropping, I say stay away from Banks. David Unger at 2,500, he's now had a couple weeks in a row where he actually has finally put the value up for you. 11 points 2 games ago, 7.9 last week, where he hit full value in both of those. But in the first 3 games of the year, his highest total was 2 points. So If this starts to be a trend of him turning the corner, I'm more likely to consider that play. But I think the Ticats themselves even have a lot better of fantasy options for cheap value plays than him. So I say stay away from David Unger. Two guys I don't have on this list here, not Jalen Acklin, he's right there in front of me, of course. Devere Posey and Braylon Addison, they are now eligible to come off the 6-game injured list this week. They have been limited in practice, so we'll have to see how whether they finally get back in the lineup. And in the depth chart update on Friday, I'll talk about either of those guys a little bit as well if they are in. But I know Braylon Addison comes in over $10,000. Look, I'm staying away from him as well for a lot of the same reasons as Banks. And same thing with Devere Posey coming in $6,000 to $7,000 off the top of my head if that hasn't changed. I want to see how they get involved in this offense in their first games after missing all season so far before I slot either of them in. Getting into the other Friday matchup, the Toronto Argonauts, Saskatchewan Roughriders. Start with the Argos here. The one option I like for them, much like with Hamilton, is one of the cheaper value plays. And this is if he's in the lineup. He did sit out last week due to injury, so he may not be ready to go again. But $26.46 is the salary for Daniel Braverman. He's averaging 10.5 points on the year, and you need just over 6.5 to get the full value out of him. So he gets involved in the return game, he gets involved in the passing game, which is why I really do like Daniel Braverman if he's in the lineup, because I think between those two, he should have no problem putting you up the point total you need to get the value. Guys I'm cautious on, Ricky Collins Jr. For the Argos seems to be their heavy target guy week in and week out. More often than not, he's the guy that is one of the leader, if not one of the top 2 or 3 in targets for the team. So I don't think 18.3 points is necessarily a huge stretch for him if he has one of those big days where he's putting up 6-7 catches for you. But I'm cautious on him just because at that price point, he hasn't put up a ton of touchdowns yet this year, I don't think. And 18.3 points is a lofty total for him. He's been averaging 12.4, and he hasn't had a week over 14 since week number 1 against Calgary. So I think there's a potential play there, but I'm a bit cautious on it. I'm cautious on Curley Gittins Jr., $2,500 for him. Last week, just 4.8 points. He's had 2 weeks over 10 so far this year, but I believe those are touchdown dependent for the most part for him. I don't think he's putting you up a huge total if he's not getting in for a touchdown grab on any given week. Chandler Worthy, $3,188. He had his first game back with the Argos last week, put up 5 points primarily as a returner. I think he was maybe a backup on offense and didn't really get a whole lot of usage there. He did show flashes in 2019 with the Argos, so if he can get back into a regular role, I do like Worthy as an option. You could even say he's worthy of being a fantasy option, full pun intended. But right now I'm a little cautious on him just from the usage standpoint. If he's just doing return duties, I'm not so sure he puts up the 8-point value for you. And a lot of guys I'm staying away from the Argos. I'm staying away from Eric Rogers, $8,786 and last week he put up just 9.6 points. You need 22 from him. He hasn't put up that at any point this year. His highest total was 2 weeks ago against Hamilton, where he put up 16 points, which came from 2 touchdowns. Eric Rogers is a guy, and the way he's being used by the Argos right now is he's very touchdown dependent, and if he's not putting up at least 1 for you, you're having a very disappointing day for the price you have to pay up to get Eric Rogers. So I say stay away from him because I think it's hard to project based on just touchdowns alone. And if there's a guy's not getting the consistent catch totals and yardage along the way, it's hard to guarantee putting him in your lineup. I also don't like DeVaris Daniels as an option this week. He's averaging just 9.5. He had that one big game against the Bombers of 24.8, but he's also had 3 of his 5 games so far this season have been less than 5 points for him. And I don't think he is one I can risk putting in my lineup personally on any given week, nor do I think somebody should take that risk themselves. It may work out if it works out, but to look at all these different receiver options for the Argos, it's hard to pick one over the other necessarily on any given week. So I say don't waste a ton of your money on picking an Argos receiver this week. And then also Levi Noel doesn't really get used in that offense when he's in the lineup. Right now he's in a backup role when he is in. And Dejon Brissett not putting up any points for you last week if you took him as a cheaper value play. So I say stay away from Brissett this week as well. Looking at the Saskatchewan side of things, I think here's where you get a couple more good value plays again. Braden Lenius is no longer $2,500. He's now at $2,764. He is averaging 8.6 points a game so far this year. And in all but 1 week, 2 weeks ago, he has hit more than the value you need out of him. So he hasn't had a monster-style game yet this year. His highest point total is 11.5 points in week number 1. But he's hovered around that kind of 7.5 to 11 point range in most of the weeks besides one letdown. So I like him as one of your cheaper value plays for the Riders. I also like Keon Schaefer-Baker, who was one of the leading receivers for the Riders last week. $2,500. Last week he put up their highest fantasy total with 14.3 points, which was well over the value you needed from him. He's averaging 9.2 in 3 games so far this year, I think 2 of those have been in a more prominent role than the one that was the letdown. So this kid seems like the real deal. And he's only going to start getting used more heavily. They have to, I think, keep going and giving him the reps after some of the performances he's put up. So I really like Keon Schaefer-Baker as a quarterback option this week if you're looking to take a cheap option for the Riders. I'm a little concerned Fajardo's injury status and what that means for everything. But at a cheap price, if you just need 6.5 points or so to get your value, I think you can get that regardless of who's at quarterback for them. Yellow light options. Kyron Moore, I talked about it last week. The week before, he put up 15 targets, 10 or so catches against the Bombers, had his big game, and put up 18.5 points in that week. Then this past week, they went elsewhere on a lot of the targets, and he put up just 11.4 in that game. He has a decent floor in general. I mean, a 15.4 average is nothing to scoff at for sure, but at $86.39 is his salary. I'm cautious on Kyron Moore putting up a 21.6 point week, especially with the unknowns at quarterback for the Riders this week. So I think he'll continue to be one of the top most targeted receivers for this team. And that should help him get you on track for your value for the most part. But I'm cautious on him hitting that full high point total you need out of him this week. Mitchell Picton also can be a decent value play for you, but in the past 3 weeks, has not hit over the 6.3 mark. He 5.8, 3.2, and then 3.6 in his last 3 games. So he's kind of trended downwards in recent weeks, partially, I think, due to Schaefer-Baker getting more of a share of the targets, and Lenius and Moore getting their fair share as well. Jordan Williams-Lambert, I'm also cautious on him. $5,000 if he's ready to go again this week. You need 12.6. He's averaging 7.3 and has not put up over 11 points at all yet this year. So I'm cautious on him hitting that total for you against an Argos defense that I think is pretty decent and should shut them down decently well. And then Ricardo Lewis, also nothing spectacular. 5.3 and 3.5 points in his 2 games so far this year. So I'm cautious on him there. And the overall caution on the Riders is just they haven't put up passing touchdowns in at least the past 2 games and a couple quarters in the game before that. So you're not going to get a ton of touchdowns out of these guys. So if they're not putting up the catches and the yards, you're not getting real value out of your Riders receivers. But they do have a lot of cheap options, and I do like some of the ones I've mentioned. Getting into the Saturday games, let's take a look first at Winnipeg and Edmonton in Edmonton, and start with the Bombers here. This is a team where I like some of the high-priced options from. In general, you've probably noticed the theme that I just don't think high-salary receivers are worth spending on for the most part. I like the value ones better. But if you're going to need to pad yourself to that close to the cap range in order to be able to get close to that and then get 2.5 points or so for each 1,000 you spend and get you to a 100-point week, you need to pick maybe a higher priced option or two. And Kenny Lawler and Nick Dembski, I think, are as good as they come. They've been averaging over 16 points each through 2 games this season. Lawler comes in 83-86 salary for him. Last week he put up 20.7, which was right there, really close to that 21 mark. He's put up over 20 points now in 3 of 6 weeks this season, but so I really like Lawler as an option as well because he seems to be the go-to targeted receiver each and every week and is a reliable option for the Bombers. And if he can get those he's got the floor of getting the targets and the yardage, and he has touchdown capability on top of there as well. So I could see Lawler being another good option to get you close to, if not full value this week. I like Nick Dembski even more because they've been averaging the same, and his price is about $900 cheaper. So 18.6 is what you need from Dembski. Last week, he put up 18.4, was really close to that. His other games he has played this year, 13.1, 21.4, and 12 points. So his salary has gone up quite a bit, and I could see eventually getting into that range of where I'm staying away from Dembski. But for now, at this price point, I think he's a good option for you to put up the points you need this week. He showed some big play capability last week and is showing that even with Darvin Adams back in the lineup now, even with some of the other great options, he's a go-to option in the Bombers offense and has a real connection with Zach Collaros, and I love to see it. The ones I'm cautious on for the Bombers, Darvin Adams averaging 10 points on the year. You need 17.2 out of him. Last week, he put up 13.9. He got that big play I talked about. But Darvin Adams is very big play dependent. He's very touchdown dependent to me. He does not get involved in that Bombers offense with, 6 to 8 catches a game. You're hovering around maybe 3 or 4 for, 50 to 70 yards for him. I don't think you're getting your value necessarily out of him unless he does score that big pass and that big touchdown. Rashid Bailey, I'm also moving him into the yellow light. He was previously one of my green light options, but in the past 2 weeks, 4.7 and 3.8 points for him. So ever since Dembski's been back in the lineup, the targets haven't necessarily gone his way as much, which makes me more cautious on him. I think he's a great receiver, and I think he is a real breakout player this year. And has been fitting in nicely in that Bombers offense, but I'm cautious as his usage seems to be going down ever since they've had both Dembski and Adams in the lineup. And then we have to, wait and see and factor in, does Naaman Roosevelt get into the lineup finally this week for the Bombers? I say red light on him because there's a chance he still doesn't, and even if he does, I want to see how he performs in that lineup. We don't know what his salary will be yet until he's in there. They showed they briefly had him in the game a couple weeks ago and it was around $6,500, which is pretty high price for a receiver, which you haven't seen play yet this year. When there's a lot of options we have seen play and can kind of make guesses based on what we've seen from them so far this season. And then staying away from Charles Nelson, the Bombers' return game has been very disappointing in recent weeks. He's averaging 4.6 points, but he has had a couple rough games in a row, and I don't think he's getting on return yards alone, getting the full value out for you. Drew Wolotarski, also staying away from him. He's had 2 weeks this year where he put up over 9 points, but his other weeks, 2.3, 4, 0, and 5.3. So on a consistent basis, he's not getting the point total that's going to be worth putting him in your lineup. Looking at the Edmonton side of things, this is where I really like a lot of the fantasy options because they have a lot of cheap receivers, and I think they can definitely get the point totals for you. Now they're facing the Bombers defense that really hasn't given up touchdowns much this season. The Bombers have held their opponents to under 10 points in 4 of their 6 games this year, which makes the matchup a little bit tough there to get the touchdown points for any of these guys, but I think there's room to get some passing yards against the Bombers' defense. I think there's definitely room to make some big plays. And the one option I really like is a higher priced guy. And this is almost one of my locks for the week, actually, is Darrell Walker. $7,870. He's averaging 12.1 on the season. You need 19.7 points to have the full value from him. If you look at his games throughout the year, 17.8 in week 1, 12.6 in week 2, just 5.2 in week 3, bounce back game with 15.4 in week 5, and then just 9.3 last week against Calgary. And you might be asking yourself, why is he such a lock this week? Well, it's because Darrell Walker just haunts the Bombers and haunts Bomber fans in their nightmares. I mean, I took a look at Walker's stats against the Bombers in the last 5 years. He's averaging 24.1 fantasy points a game against this team in games he's played. We've seen games where he's put up 10 catches for 180 yards, 170 yards a couple times, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns. I don't know if there's any guy that has a team's number more than Darrell Walker. He has been fantastic against the Bombers, both when he was with Edmonton and when he was with Toronto last season. It didn't matter. It didn't matter who the quarterback was. It didn't matter what the Bombers' defense looked like. Darrell Walker had himself a fantastic game, and that's a pretty good 5-year trend that I like banking on this week again. I also like Shai Ross, Jalen Tolliver, Ernest Edwards. Take your pick between them all. We can talk about them all at once. They've all had averages over the value you need from them, which is why I put them in the green light category. You don't need a whole ton of points from them. They should get a couple catches and enough yardage and be able to make a couple plays, especially if the Bombers can't wrap up some of the tackles like we've seen them struggle with in recent weeks. Of the 3 options, and it pretty much depends on the depth chart too of who's in the lineup as a starter, but I like Ernest Edwards, especially if Terry Williams is out and Edwards is returning, handling kick returns again this week to get some extra points against the Bombers in that regard, because they have given up a little more yardage on returns this year than normal, I feel like. So I like Ernest Edwards, 14.6 2 weeks ago, 6.1 this past week for him. I think Jalen Tolliver also, hasn't been too bad, 15.8 and then 6 in the past 2 weeks. And Shai Ross over a 4-game span has had, 9.7, 12.5, 6.4, and then 4.4 last time in his 4 starts this year. So he's had 3 games on the season that have been over the point total. So I like all of them. I would go, if I was trying to rank them, I'd probably go Ernest Edwards, Shai Ross, Jalen Tolliver, but I think it's very close, and any one of them could be a good pick. And I also like Mike Jones, $45.19 salary, averaging 10.7, which is just below what you need to get 2.5 points per 1,000 from him. Last week was a down week for him. Last week was a down week for everyone at wide receiver for the Elks. But Before that, he had a 20.7 point week. He had 12 and 11.2 in the 2 games before that as well. So it's been a pretty good year for Mike Jones. And there's room to pass the ball, I think, against the Bombers, and he could be a go-to target there again. I'm cautious on Greg Ellingson. He's also had his fair share of big games against Winnipeg, but he comes at $8,047. And last week he put up just 5 points for you. He's had a couple games on the year now where he's been a bit of a disappointment. Take out that week 3, 23.8 dominating performance against BC. And his highest total on the year is just 13.5. So if he gets most of the targets his way, I think Ellingson could have himself a nice game and put up over 20 points for you. Problem is, I don't know if he's getting a touchdown, and looking at all these different receivers, I think I feel fairly confident that they're going to spread the ball around a little bit. So he's higher priced than Walker. I put him in the cautious category because of that. I like Walker in his typical performances against the Bombers a little bit more, and I'm a bit more cautious on Greg Ellingson. And then finally, staying away from Tavon Smith. He's been in a backup role quite a bit this year, even as a starter. A game or two, he hasn't done a whole lot, and is at a pricey $62.16. And Armonte Edwards has been injured for a couple of games, and in the 2 games he's played, he's averaged 4.2. So that almost $8,000 salary is ridiculously high for what I'd be willing to put Armonte Edwards in my lineup if he is back in for Edmonton. And then finally, taking a look at BC versus Montreal, our final game to talk about here. The Lions absolutely lit up the Ottawa Red Blacks last week, and the Montreal Alouettes lit them up the week before. So this could be a very high-scoring game, potentially, between 2 offenses that have all of the talent they need to explode. But the one option I like for BC only is Javon Cotoy. Because you look at the rest of BC's receivers, and a lot of them are very high-priced. And while they can have big fantasy performances, they kind of price themselves out of being worth putting in your lineup. But I like Javon Cotoy. $46.79 is his salary. He's averaging 7.4 on the year, but really, that takes into account the first 3 games of the year where he was a backup. In the last 2 games since he got meaningful usage, 20.3 points against Ottawa 2 games ago, and then 16.9 this past time around. Dominic Rhymes, I think, is now on the 6-game injured list. Lamar Durant was injured last week, may not be ready to go again. I have not seen the injury update on him quite yet. So Javon Cotoy should be a starter at wide receiver again. He's a big body. He can break tackles. He can get himself open. And I don't see any reason why at a $46.79 salary he can't put up at least 11.7 points for you. So he is a very good option to me as somebody hovering in that middling price range. The ones I'm cautiously optimistic on, Lucky Whitehead has had himself a fantastic year and is, in my opinion, one of the breakout players of the year so far. But with that means his salary has gone up. He's now over $9,000, and last week he put up exactly what you needed to get this full value, which is 22.7 points. He's facing a Montreal defense that did give up some big days against Ottawa 2 weeks ago, and maybe there's some room to pass against the Alouettes a little bit. I know Jake Mayer had a 300-yard passing game against them earlier this year, and Riley in that offense is all pass for the Lions. So Whitehead seems to be one of his favorite targets to go to for some deep passes along the sideline. He also picked up that missed field goal return, which was a thing of beauty last week, which helped his stats there. So I do like Lucky Whitehead, but his first week and his week 6, both of them got you the full value, but in between there, 17.9 points in week 2, 7.4 in week 3, 12.4 in week 4. I'm not so sure he gets you the full value at his price. I'm cautious on that regard, but I think it's not too far out of the range of possibility for him. I also kind of like Keon Hatcher as a value play at $2,500. He got in for his first game last week and put up 11.5 fantasy points. Got himself a touchdown in his first start. Not a bad debut, if you ask me. The reason I put him as cautious is pretty much the same reason I do for any value play who has a good first game, is show me a repeat performance that you are successful in back-to-back weeks before I give you the green light. Options I'm staying away from. Brian Burnham, one of the most explosive receivers in the CFL. Fantastic day last week with 24.2, but that means his salary has gone up once again. Now it's almost at $11,500, and you need a 29-point day from Brian Burnham to get the full value, which I think much for the same reason I'm cautious on guys like a Kamara Jordan, like a Brandon Banks, is even if they do have a fantastic day, it's really hard to put that up. Maybe one or two receivers each and every week do. And I think the matchup with Montreal is going to be a little tougher, obviously, than it was with Ottawa the week before. So I'm saying stay away from Brian Burnham, much like Lucky Whitehead. 3 weeks in the middle of his schedule so far where he put up 16.1, 5.2, and 14.4, which was all under 1.5 points per $1,000. So more often than not this year, you're not getting value out of Brian Burnham. I'm staying away from Lamar Durant. I want to see how he performs coming off of injury if he is in the lineup. At $6,000, 15.2 points. He hasn't hit that total more than 11.1 once yet this year. So I'm staying away from Durant. Dominic Rhymes is on the 6-game list now, so we should definitely stay away from him because he won't be in the lineup. And Shaq Johnson, who finally hit himself the full value play last week with 9.8 points. I'm still staying away from him, though, because I think those are more rare than they are common from him. And he also has had several games this year, a couple games of less than 1 point and a game of 4 points. So more often than not, you're not getting value out of Shaq Johnson. And the final team to talk about, the Montreal Alouettes. No option I really, really love for Montreal because I think they have so many talented receivers, and I'm really not sure what to make of this team. This is a team that at wide receiver has kind of struggled a little bit in back-to-back weeks, or in a good chunk of the game so far this year, and then we all of a sudden had them break out in week number 5 against Ottawa when Jake Weineke put up 31 points and Eugene Lewis put up 29. So is that the real Montreal? Have they finally turned the corner, or is it the case of them facing an Ottawa team that hasn't been very good? So I'm cautious on a lot of their starters here. BJ Cunningham, averaging 11.6 on the year. He's been kind of having a downward trend. His salary is one of the lower ones, the lowest of the main starters for Montreal at $61.24. But week 2, he had 19.6 points. Since then, 9.1, 10.9, and 6.7. So he hasn't put up any strong performances in the recent weeks. So I'm cautious on him there. But he does have the potential, and I do like the potential for him to get a 15-point week more than I like some of the higher-priced options, I think. Jake Weineke is a touchdown magician, I'll call him that. 8 touchdown catches in 2019. He has 4 in 4 games already this year. I said a little bit earlier that it's hard to project a guy just based on touchdown totals, but it's becoming harder and harder to not just factor that in for Weineke because he catches so many of them. And he's had himself a solid day so far, or a solid season so far this year as well, with 2 games over 100 yards. So it's not just touchdown dependent for Jake Weineke. His price has risen and he's very expensive now. And you're going to need a 22-point week from him, which, he had 31 last game, but before that, 11.2, 16.6, and 10, which was not really getting you necessarily close to that. And if he doesn't get you that touchdown or doesn't get you that 100 yards, he's not going to get you close to the value you need at a high price. I'm also cautious on Eugene Lewis. $89.25 salary. He had his breakout game of the year with 29 points against Ottawa as well. And it's a breakout, I saw coming eventually. He was the most targeted receiver for the Alouettes so far this year. They just hadn't connected on a lot of those passes, and they finally did. And if you put him in your lineup in week 5, you got tremendous bang for your buck in taking Eugene Lewis. But is that the norm now going forward for him, or is he going to fall back to what he did in his first 3 games with 8.3, 11.7, and 7.6? I see somewhere in between. I could see him being the potential guy to put up over 22.3 once again, sure. But this falls into the category of, does Vernon Adams Jr. spread the ball around quite a bit? I think so. And is he going to get that consistent targets that he needs in order to have that really strong week in and week out? So I'm cautious on Eugene Lewis. I'm also cautious on Mario Alford, who doesn't get involved in the offense, but does at kick return. 8 points is what you need for full value from him. 7.1 is his average. He only had 1 game, though, where he did get a return touchdown. He put up 14.2. Other than that, 4.7, 4.8, and 4.7. So hovering around the 5-point range. So you know what? Maybe Mario Alford, maybe I should have put him more in the red-white category, because on most weeks he's not giving you what you need to get to be happy with the point total you get out of Mario Alford. And the one I say stay away from, Quan Bray, if he's back in the lineup. He missed last game against Ottawa, but before that, 4 points, 12.7, 10.3. He's averaging 9 in 3 games. I think he gets the least targets out of any of those main Alouettes receivers, and I think he's going to be in tough to put up 17.6 this week if he is back in there. So, don't love a ton of the options. I like a ton of them. It's just hard picking for me with the Alouettes which one is the actual go-to option each week, which makes me lean towards being cautious and probably staying away from them more often than not. That does it for all of the options at wide receiver. Boy, there are a lot of options to go through each and every week. I know this one's always the longest video of the week, so I appreciate you putting up with me going through each and every one of them each and every week. I hope it's helpful for you to see them all in comparison to one another. But that does it for the wide receiver preview. Again, if you missed it, go back, check out the quarterbacks and the running backs. We'll have the defenses out later on Thursday as well, all up on the YouTube channel. Do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't. If you have any fantasy questions, put them in the comments section or tweet them at me at CooperTrooper42 on Twitter. I'm always happy to answer fantasy questions. If you want to play CFL Fantasy alongside myself and other viewers, check the video description. There's a link there to the Canadian Football Fantasy Fix League on the official CFL Fantasy site, so you can play alongside myself and others there. And that's it for the receiver preview. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Have a good one. Bye.